Welcome to the Back in the Bay magazine show. Today I have Denis Stokes, a literary genius, a poet. Who knows it? Thank you for coming to the studio.
Good to have you. Good to be with you.
I've enjoyed our conversations over the last few years, getting to know each other. I think we have some interesting topics we like to natter on about, politics and others, but we're here to talk about literary achievements and the potential of what literary love can do for a community, if I can't find a better word for that. And you've recently published, I think, your third book. Mm-hmm. Tell us right off the bat what the third book's all about, and if there's anything upcoming that people can attend to hear you read. Before
I mention the third book, there's really three books, and the one focuses on Toronto, Dave.
Yeah.
With a thread of poems dealing with my experience in Africa, and a lot of the poems are about the loss of my father at that time. I grew up in Toronto, worked in the subways through school and so on. Next book is more Irish, English, Scottish, Celtic stuff. And the focus is on kind of children and the experience of children, with, again, my father's childhood being part of that. And then the last one, that's just come out 6-7 weeks ago, is called A Wolf Rages Down the Little Jocko. Mm-hmm. And these are poems that are maybe inspired by the North. I lived in northern BC, northern Quebec, and obviously northern Ontario. And so these poems draw from those experiences. And again, there's a little African thread going through to kind of make some interesting energies between the North and South experiences and so on. So this book has poems about being in a northern town, about being in the wilderness. There's a good number of canoe poems and hiking poems, a couple of sports poems, because I'm pretty passionate about certain sports, and also poems dealing with friendships from various parts of the community, whether it's some of my friends from First Nations communities to teammates on the Callander Legion team, or colleagues at St. Joe's Schollard or Nipissing University. So the book's available in Allison's and Coles, but you can email me, and I can even deliver a signed one to you for a small fee. And there's a launch through our reading series in town called Conspiracy of Three on the 12th at the library.
November 12th.
November 12th. And then November 16th, the Saturday in the afternoon at 2, there's kind of an official launch. The great part of these three books is that they really are worth reading, I think. They're certainly worth writing. But none of them were launched other than online. So Tunnel Jumping, the first book, was launched online from my place in North Bay when I was organizing the reading series. The Irish book, The Blackstock Children, was launched online while my wife and I were in just near the border of where my granddad was born, in Tipperary. And then the last one is going to be launched here, and that's the first one in person. So I'm kind of excited about doing an in-person launch.
Oh, that's cool. Why do you think poetry is important?
Well, that's a heck of a question, and obviously it's a lifetime's question that I've tried to answer in different ways. So let's sort of work backwards a little bit here. And so I was saying in a reading in Callander, I was quoting the famous monk and poet Thomas Merton, where he talks about all of the different voices, almost like birds, out there being heard to, even though you can't hear them. And he talked about the voice of T.S. Eliot or Emily Dickinson or W.H. Auden and so on. And I was saying to my friends in Callander last week that North Bay, even though North Bay's not really aware of it, most individuals at least, that it's full of all these voices, the voices of Ken Stang and Ian McCullough and Dorothy Kaufman and so many other poets and writers who have been here. And of course, the beautiful thing is there are many poets, novelists, and so on who are adding to those songs that are in the community. And even if you don't necessarily read them, you can hear those in little phrases that people might mention. The people who've been influenced by reading an Ian McCullough poem or his wonderful novel, Joe Pete, or a Ken Stang, one-liner in a class, or a one-liner in his poems, and of course just the pure presence of somebody like Dorothy. When we read journalism, and when we write journalism, not that I need to tell you this, you're trying to write something that somebody only needs to read once. In terms of understanding, clarity, in terms of cutting to the chase and presenting something worthwhile to contribute to the dialogue in a community. When you're talking about literature, and I would suggest poetry is sort of the arguably highest form of literature, and so a poetic novel like a novel by Virginia Woolf, or a novel by the Russian poet Pasternak, or a poetic film, or poetic song lyrics. That's all part of what I mean by poetry in this sense. We're writing something in literature then that people would want to read again, because there's enough beauty and truth there, and there's enough suggestiveness and mystery and yet impact that draws the person on to gather spiritual strength, to gather some kind of vision, some sense that there's another human being that was alive and ticking at some time that shares an experience that somehow I can connect with. So C.S. Lewis in the Shadowlands movies, we read to know we're not alone. But then it goes deeper than that, because poetry helps to create an imaginative space where people can begin to interact. As my last formal teacher, Jack Myers, says it's one person's insides communicating to another person's insides. And of course, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that the majority of our society, certainly our culture, operates on the surface. The Irish poet and spiritual writer John O'Donoghue said that, most of us are marooned on the surfaces of our lives. And if we're marooned on the surfaces of our lives, then we kind of have the experience, but we miss the meaning, we miss the depth, we miss the love, we miss the sense of possibility. And here's one for you, Dave, in terms of many talks you and I have had about politics. Poetry is the language of possibility. And yet we know that politics is supposedly the art of the possible. And as Gilly Phillips, a professor at Nipissing, once put it in an article, to try to bridge those two together, I think brings a society, a culture farther on. So just to round off, last point. There was a place in a part of the world I know well called Northern Ireland, where there was much violence and much hatred and much distrust. And yet, long before the Good Friday Agreement and all the courage of leaders like Mr. Hume and so on, the Northern Irish poets were in dialogue with each other on both sides of that, sectarian wall, and began to create a space, to use the words of Seamus Heaney, wherein and through which dialogue could happen. And it seems to me there's lots of room for that in any given culture, whether it's the voice, of the post-colonial African writers, or in our own culture and our own country, despite, some of the deep insights of somebody like Conrad Black, a renaissance of understanding, a renaissance of the Indigenous story that obviously is going to enrich all of us. And it's that freedom, that liberation of the voices of women in the early 60s in particular, all the way to now, such that a lot of our most important writers are easily women in our Canadian culture. And so that's all part of that journey of understanding. And our world's hungry for imaginative compassion. And I think poetry and the poetic elements in all the arts is what creates that foundation.
Wow.
It's time to talk about sports, maybe, Dave. so your listeners and viewers don't go and grab a beer and watch the Yankees, lose the fourth game in the World Series.
That's funny, right? Well, speaking of which, you're a fastball pitcher. You're also a retired teacher, and you have lived a fairly full life as far as that goes, from your travels and your adventures and the people you've met. You have some very talented children. Let's plug a couple of your children there.
Oh, I thought you were going to So I think I inherited it from my father, and then I tried to tone it down, that sense of, boasting, bragging about your children. And so I don't want to turn this into like a children commercial, but certainly my own children give me great strength. So to begin with, I've been writing for 400 years, and I gave myself a good talking to after teaching in a First Nations community in northern Quebec, and said, okay, it's time to, as one poet put it, weigh in. And so that's when I began to put manuscripts together and to look for publishers of actual books, not just journals and all of those kinds of things. And I drew much strength in that kind of orientation and that kind of courage and risk from my own kids, whether it's my son's efforts in setting up a non-alcoholic concert series when he was 16 in North Bay, getting punk bands from all over the country, some of which became, very famous overnight after starting in North Bay, probably not because they went to North Bay. Or my daughter Roserin, who just sings and writes her songs with great heart, great soulfulness, and again with great risk, and her willingness to share that work, which really became a kind of model for me in many ways, certainly an inspiration. And my eldest daughter, Lara, who is a very serious writer, poet. She's written a play or two, and she's written a book of nonfiction and written a novel, and those are all out looking for homes. And her courage in trying to present her plays in the Toronto Fringe Festival and so on. And then my youngest, Meg, who maybe is the most talented of all of us, although I might get heck for saying that. I think most actors in the community would agree with me that she's a brilliant actor. And so her courage in going onto the stage and taking on different roles and really bringing great spiritual strength to her roles, whether it's Joan of Arc or her one-person play, Run Girl Run. I think it's Run Girl Run. Mm. So that gives me great strength. And then the mother of the children is really where the kids get their talent and maybe even their sense of humor and probably their patience, because my wife Mary is incredibly talented, particularly with music, but in many things. She really is a kind of all-round artist, but her real gift is music with children. But she's been a composer on the side all these years, and I've been trying to encourage her to share more of it.
I liked how you put that, because our children and all the people around us are easily the best source of inspiration and also as mentors in life, right? Because they show you what courage looks like and what it achieves, right? And it reminds us.
Very much so. And if we're talking about North Bay, there are many criticisms of North Bay. We know that. And some of it has to do with that lack of imaginative compassion, lack of vision. Sometimes it's driving that. And yet at the same time, we have so many heroes in this community. I have two personal political heroes in this neck of the woods. And certainly, even though I may not share the complete political stripes of an Anthony Rhoda, I think he's done much to maintain a level of civility in a time when our country was floundering post Harper with regard to name calling and that. And we don't need to see too many trucks driving around to get an idea where all that's going and how our country needs to ground itself and respect the otherness of different points of view, other perspectives, other political values. And then certainly Charlie Angus as well as somebody who's been a strong voice for the working person in the North and certainly Indigenous communities as well. And then if we start kind of walking around to the different coffee shops and so on, I bumped into a batch of guys yesterday at Twigs in Worthington where most of those guys, about 4 or 5 of the 10 that were around the table, and there was no OPP supervising them, even though there should have been. And when you start looking at people like Terry Vendetti, Mike Doyle, Larry Tugas, and all the other kinds of coaches, you were talking to John Whitted a few weeks ago. These people have just had such a huge impact on individual lives, and And I think the richness of childhood experience in North Bay, despite the fact that some of the kids live in disadvantaged situations, and unfortunately a lot of them don't have access to organized hockey or the Dreamcoat Theater that was set up with, by two very, very, selfless, creative people. Those are the things that I think help to keep our community going. All those little efforts that really imagine a different kind of life for all of us, but particularly for the young ones in our community. And then if we move into other aspects of the community, whether it's the Davidi Club or heroes like George Cucci from Nipissing 10, just widening and deepening the dialogue and clarifying our story, while at the same time showing paths towards a real hopefulness and a real joy through some of the suffering that different people have experienced, whether it's the immigrants first coming to North Bay or the Indigenous people in our different communities, whether it's along the Ottawa River, the Algonquin folks, or Bear Island, or north of that, the Cree, or obviously Nipissing 10 or Dokis, where they may have experienced injustices and cruelties of all kinds.
When we talk about sports and arts as being let's just say a motivator of community, it brings community together, and where there's factions that wouldn't necessarily come together unless there was sports. Sometimes they play on each other's teams. Sometimes they play against each other. There's respect and earned and displayed, and friendships that grow out of it. I was actually we're doing the sportscast with the Echo Network, and somebody was asking me about what the highest priority in the community is to tackle, and I think they were thinking more politically, socially. And I said, I don't really know what the most highest priority is, but I know that one of the best cures for what ails us is bringing community together through sports and arts and whatnot. And the Conspiracy of the Three has maintained a long tradition of doing that, even though it's on the peripheral of a lot of people's minds. It meets, doesn't gather large numbers of people, but it's still there. So tell me a little bit about the history, how it created the Conspiracy of Three, and what it means to North Bay.
So there's a lot there. When we talk about the arts and sports in different ways, whether it's watching the old World Fastball Tournament with 38 teams from all across the province and a few from other parts of the country, or watching some of the hockey tournaments in town, whether it's the old ones or the little ones, you're talking about aspects of heart and soul. And of course, literature and the arts in general, the theater in this community, as my friend Rick DeMills in Sudbury says, North Bay packs way beyond its weight in the arts. Obviously, the amount of bands, singer-songwriters, Amanda Punch from CBC said that live original music in North Bay is one of the best-kept secrets in the country. So we have all of those, and I know, and when we talk about visual artists, I mean, that's amazing. And the visual artists and the poets in particular are kind of interesting because we're all aware they're there, but they just kind of go about quietly, as William Butler Yeats would say, bearing witness in different ways. That said, you end up with a kind of energy from that goes from that creative core into other parts of the community, and certainly the other arts. And my sense is that the people who are sitting there in their solitude, there's a wonderful Leonard Cohen poem about that, deep into their solitude to write their songs or to paint their pictures or to write their poems and their novels. Those people are really kind of the core of kind of creative, spiritual energy within the community. And then out of that, because there are a few people doing that, it's a bit like, when we have people at prayer in various parts of the world, whatever the tradition, that energy and that compassion and that imagination moves out. And so we're very, very rich indeed in our community. So Conspiracy of Three has been going, Dave, for 36 years. one of the longest running literary series in the province. I'm probably going to get a kick in the arse for giving incorrect information, but it started by Gil McElroy, Ken Stang, and I think Ian McCullough, and I have a feeling I've missed somebody, so my apologies to that person. And we have readings of poetry and literature, and as you know, Dave, because you've attended quite a few now, we have 2 featured readers, and ideally we try to have a poet and a fiction writer, but it doesn't always work that way. And quite often we'll have a writer in formation and then a more established writer, or a local writer and then a writer coming out. So when I read next one, the 12th, one of Canada's finest writers, Bruce Meyer, is going to be reading alongside yours truly. So very rich. And then we have an open mic session, and we have a very, very supportive and appreciative audience where writers in formation or people who are reading their first poem ever in front of a group come. And it's a very welcoming group. Most of the time we have snackies, and we've had many, many venues, and we've been kicked out of most of them because we caused so much trouble. Or maybe it's because we haven't spent enough money. There are too many teetotalers. That would be my argument. Yeah. But all jokes aside, we've been at the library now for the last almost year now.
Yeah, very accessible and easy to get to. And I remember you talking about the same subject at the Fringe Festival, where there was a little bit of a confluence of, and you said this healthy sort of merging of theatrical and the poetic, right? And I think another person who was reading there is author herself, Stephanie Cast, who's involved with the theater. So that just like you said, that sort of blending and sort of intertwining of the fabric makes everything so much stronger here.
Very much so. I've been blessed mainly through my kids and my wife as well, I guess, to meet people working in different arts. So I would consider certainly a good number of the people in the theater community friends and even good friends. And I've been sort of kidnapped and thrown on the stage a couple of times to half embarrass myself with all of my heroes who are on stage. And then visual arts through some of my wife's friends, and obviously through my kids' singer-songwriting bands, all of that. And so all of those arts, there's a kind of movement of, as Gandhi would say, the Holy Spirit of love and truth working among all the arts. But I think we're just at the point now in the community, and a lot of credit goes to creative industries who have organized some real serious funding for the different groups to not only present, but also to share. And I think the next step is to have like a cafe or even a little pub that is a gathering place of different artists. And so a songwriter can sit down with a visual artist they've never met before, because that, even in a town this small, that's the case. Or a really, really good creative writer sits down, with somebody who acts, and all the variations of that theme. And I think out of that, cross-pollination, if you will, there's a whole new kind of energy that can come. And that's why I was trying to encourage the Fringe Festival to make room for Conspiracy of Three. And it was a blast having, one of our senior writers like Bill Walton get up and read, and then, some of our youngest singer-songwriters, coming out of our community. Somebody like Jude Sapala, who's been able to overcome the corruption of your baseball coaching.
I'm not sure if I coached Jude. I know I misnamed him in a sports photo when he was playing soccer. There was another young guy that's a singer that I coached in baseball, Nick. I can't remember his last name, but little Nick, and he's doing really well.
Bogle.
Not Bogle, no.
There's another talented
Yeah, there's so many talented people in town.
It's staggering.
Every
Dave.
time I go out somewhere, I meet somebody that, like even in my field, I was at the Lakers game the other night, men's game, and there's a young guy. He's just finishing up at Algonquin. He was catching action that I wasn't catching, and so I started chatting him up, and that's a real skill in itself, and to be able to be a cinematographer. That's where this young lad's probably heading, not just a sports action videographer. I know everybody's waiting with bated breath, though, to hear you read a poem.
Sure. Just before that, a little commercial. The film industry, of course, has been awesome in this community. And we know that the quality of work, we won't mention like Christmas Hallmark's films here in public, but so it's pretty uneven. But the not just the employment possibility that exists, but the filmmakers in this community is pretty inspiring. So so a member of our extended family is in fact someone working on a serious film and truly gifted, in my opinion. And I had a coffee 2 weeks ago with a person who lived in North Bay, is now in New York City and working on his own films. So that's all very, very exciting. So maybe, I'm not sure what I'll read. Maybe I'll start off just because hockey season's starting, Dave. And I'll read a poem called Dedication. And I wrote this about 200 years ago. I'm a really avid ball hockey player and a hockey fan, although I'm kind of laying off hockey for, as I've told you, I'm a little fed up with the betting ads. And so until they get that sorted out, I'm going to try to avoid. But I have to confess, I am keeping track of the scores, particularly for some of the teams that I've
stalking an ex-girlfriend, are you?
So this poem's called Dedication, and it's dedicated for my friend Bill Gibson from Midland, Ontario, who died a couple of years ago. This is for the guys who shoveled snow from icy ponds, backyards, or driveways, shooting the puck to the flash of struggling skates well into the dark, dreaming of floodlights and crowds under stars, and now shovel the ice of the nation from roadways, shovel in offices, classrooms, trucks, stores beside horses' hooves, to keep the beer on ice under a roof where they applaud the miracles on Saturday night TV, living in a world of replays, staring lonely at the screen full of stars, ghosts, and angels, with worry and wonder, as if they were children, as if it were sky. I'm going to read the title poem of Wolf. So a little story behind this is 5 of us writers, I think it was 5, were approached by the Kennedy Gallery to look at the house collection of art that's buried away in closets in the top floors. And we were asked to generate some pieces of writing. And so there was one sketch that had a kind of wolf with stripes on it. So there is an image in the poem from that. So that's where that's coming from. And then at the same time, almost fortuitously, but not for the person involved, a trapper working along the Little Jocko was attacked by a wolf. And so in drawing from the painting and then thinking of remember there was a newspaper called The Nugget? There was an article talking about pulling community together and so on. There was a powerful article about that experience. And so this poem comes from it. And not to kind of spoon feed your listeners, but the poem is really an exploration of having enough courage to be open rather than to kind of close in and then begin to point the nuclear weapons or the other weapons towards that which is other. And of course, the wolf in general, despite the efforts of Archie Bellany, Grey Owl, is often perceived with fear, and yet we know they're an incredibly beautiful animal. A wolf rages down the Little Jocko. Sorry that this poem is going to get some people in a winter mood after the lovely snowfall. Thank God there's nobody throwing vegetables. This whitening winter, which becomes your life, makes this frozen loneliness crowding your blood. And if there were clouds intimating light or some warmth to come farther down the river, you hear only days later in this nightmare, which holds you from the cabin in your heart, all becomes a frost cutting, a dark charging you like an empty train with a dead light, those eyes wild with the taste of your name, and with stripes which turn you into hard lines of fear's prisoner. Its eyes widen to its leaps. You squirt because the sun is hard with ice where you planted traps last week, and suddenly you are not sure whether you should run back to the highway's fever or greet the beast, free at last, offering your hand with all your life, your love. So even though it's a poem about a trapper being kind of chased down by a wolf, and all that that entails on a kind of primal level. I mean, just a little poetry class for the the television audience. That free at last should echo Martin Luther King, for example. Or for those who are really holy among us, which you and I clearly aren't, Dave, you think of St. Francis in the little village of Gubbio, facing the wolves and then establishing a dialogue. So sort of that goes back to a lot of what I think poetry manages to do, not only within ourselves as we struggle through our own journeys and our fears and wrestle with our own failings, our own errors. So too, when you have a healthy poetic life, and Thomas D'Arcy McGee, one of our first great Canadians, talked about, until a nation has a literature, it is no nation. And so when we think of the incredible inheritance now we have, going back to our Indigenous legends, that we as Canadians have inherited, and that is still being, built upon, we realize how blessed we are and how that strength, that spiritual strength, that capacity for imagination, seeing another point of view, of learning a healthy discourse rather than the name-calling that sometimes we descend to as Canadians. We get a sense of the power of literature and also how it has a humanizing effect.
For me, sometimes it seems that poetry is a coming to terms with the coldness and the warmth of reality. That's
a very, I think, true and profound insight there, because on one hand, I mean, the great Canadian poet Raymond Schuster said, all poems kind of come out of loneliness. And we could talk about loneliness as one of the, the great diseases of our time, particularly the loneliness of the marginalized, the homeless, the unloved seniors, and so many others. Those people maybe who have divergent mindsets, so to speak. And then we also have the need to detach, so that Dave isn't listening to the gospel according to Dave, and Denis isn't listening to the gospel of Dave, that our hearts pried open, to borrow a phrase from Seamus Heaney, so that there is room for the heart, there is room for that warmth. And so there's a wonderful capacity for human warmth, for a range of emotions and so on, but those emotions are precise and disciplined, and they're grounded in reality. And in that reality, then, we're also aware of the distances between us and the necessity to create songs and stories and art forms and languages to bridge those distances so that we can begin to develop a kind of common understanding, a collective communal vision with which we can move forward to solve our problems and also to create new possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Can you read us a poem from your first book?
Sure. I have a poem here called Upon Cleaning Out the Yonge Street Washroom that I'm not going to read because we're getting close to dinner time. But let me read maybe the title poem. Yeah, I think I'll read the title poem, Dave. In the last poem, I would encourage you, anybody who's over 50 and loves the person they're with, at least most of the time, I'd strongly encourage you to get the book just so you can read the last poem. But this is called Tunnel Jumping, and again, it kind of comes out of a direct experience. And out of the story there, I think, speaks for itself. And so where I lived in Scarborough, mid-Scarborough, joining two streets underneath the train tracks was a tunnel. And sometimes it was a place of fear, and other times a place of romance. You could go to the public high school one direction with its pool. You could go the other way to the ball field. Played a lot of my formative years of ball in. And then, this girlfriend, that girlfriend. And so that place became a real special place to all of us. Tunnel jumping. People in such plenitude. The train rail path was a space we knew only by wheels grinding out a stop at an unseen light, or around the ball field a turn before straightening to the lake. The train was always over or above The junction between neighborhoods, say, from Herb's place to where my first love, Heather, bloomed beyond my dreams. The junction was a tunnel, long poured before our time, always cold and echoing, its dense weave of water, stone, and sand, smooth to our dark touches, though I think there must have been light in there. Once at dusk, late spring, I was walking 2 friends home when, at the tunnel's mouth, fell the weight of a dead man, swinging at first, then, with the rope tightening, falling still. Of course, Liz and Sharon screamed low and muddled in that stark acoustics of late light, their fear echoing even now. My ear still hurts. Though it turned out to be only kids run out of firecrackers, frogs, hankering after fun, for weeks my friends insisted that we tunnel jumped over hill of rail and rough stones through the fence wires' refusals. The train which took lives became just a ghost sound from far off, never coming, always going away. Its loud, dark, safe in the thoughts of my 2 friends, woken in their walk by yet another execution inside the minds of boys, and each stuffed puppet keeps troubling me. And there's a kind of an interesting story there during apartheid, and also with respect to the protests in the Nigerian Delta against the oil companies. First, as there were a host of protesters who were hung, and then quite often during apartheid, the prisoners would be shown effigies of themselves as if they're going to hang themselves. And of course, these weren't suicides, even they were recorded as such. And so for quite a while, Dave, must have been a year, I was trying to write about that. And I just could never find the angle of entry. And then out of this sort of waiting for, a lot of poetry is waiting. And so this poem finally came in that image of walking with my friends and realizing that same kind of psychological violence and cruelty that these little boys were perpetrating came from a very deep, dark place, which obviously became one of the central stories of our world during that time.
Oh, wow. Well, as a reporter for the Nugget, you get called for all kinds of assignments and stuff. And one day there was this gentleman that was hung from the bridge near at the end of Chippewa Creek, where the wastewater plant is. So in between there and Lee Park. And
my God,
my photographic job was to try to capture that, knowing that there's a certain, you'd have to be a miracle worker to get something that could portray what had happened and still be suitable for publication. I thought I had what was artistically the most provocative, and it was you can just see the shoes hanging. That was like 15, 17 years ago. And we talk about the issues now in society, about the slow death of addictions and the drugs that people are taking out of mistake or hopelessness or trauma, leading to self-abuse and self-destruction. But I think we should have ran that. And I think we should be talking about suicides more often, because not talking about them hasn't helped. Painting over them, hiding them, not counting them. Yeah. It was in September. I was at the CMHA. They had a panel discussion on suicide. And I haven't put the video together yet. And I was waiting for some other reason. There's more talk about suicide and trying to get people help. And I know this is a off tangent from what your poetry was, but the image came to me. Still, I don't think they talk about it in the right way to make it okay for someone to contemplate, process, and then walk away from the thought of self-destruction. They're trying to make it okay to talk about it with somebody if you're troubled and thinking about suicide. But I don't think they make it okay to just get through life and assess your situation and say, it's okay to think about it and it's okay to move on from it. I think that's one of the key things. This is left field from what you're talking about, but it's.
I think it's very close to. I wish I could say something sort of, genuinely wise and even authentic and helpful about that. And I know in conversation, I probably after a while could, but a lot of. Just to come full circle, a lot of literature is about the breaking of silence. So, Virginia Woolf asks in her book, A Room of One's Own, well, what if Shakespeare had a sister? When I graduated from teaching secondary, I said to my friends, I remember actually when I back in the 1800s when I was leaving U of T, one of the professors who I wasn't close to, but a friend was, said the next frontier will be the hearing impaired. Now we're talking a long time ago here, early 80s. And think of the incredible progress that's been made. And when I graduated, I said to my friends and colleagues who would listen, I said, our next is to move forward with our students who are struggling with mental health issues, which is it's a woven mess wherein people are trying to make a nest for themselves to protect or to gather strength or so on. And yet we know how vulnerable so many people are and how vulnerable we ourselves become at times. So the breaking of silence with regard to those struggles we all have, and then the breaking of silence of the stories that people are wearing and carrying each day, and more so in our own community, Dave. Like I did 2 workshops with the forensics department at the hospital. And we're talking about the people who are really, really struggling, and out of that struggle have done violence. And so their freedoms are not our freedoms. And my job was to try to help the coordinators write something that would tell the story of this person's growth in healing and their potential to kind of re-enter society. And, there were a lot of good things happening. And if you hear stories, there are a lot of good things that have happened in the stories of healing in our own community. But obviously, at this point, we're overwhelmed. And we know that the moose in the woods in North Bay is the symptom of homelessness, but it's really much deeper in terms of what goes on in families, children being abused, not enough you and I, Dave, if we've had a bad day, we can pay $150 and have a psychologist guide us over the next few months. And we might even be able to, manage to pay for that. But what if those people who are going to school, high school students, university students who can't afford, the 10 or 15 or 20 meetings that are needed? What of all those people who at some point were approached more proactively? Do you remember you and I were sitting across from Allison's and a man was there? We said we both wanted to go across the road and engage with him. But we know, too, because we knew that particular individual had some propensity to violence. And so we need a whole reforming of our approach to these people. But obviously these things begin, with just giving people the time of day. Albert Camus talks about how one writer who he bumped into had written or wrote in the journal about Albert Camus that he was considering suicide that day, and he met Albert Camus, the great French writer, and he said the kindness of his words to me made me want to continue living. And going back to wonderful things going, we have a program in our community called Art Fix for people who have direct, indirect experience of mental health struggles. And so they've offered music, art, all kinds of stuff. And I've been privileged to do a couple of workshops over the years. And the last one we did last year was around that theme of hope. And so, I mean, there's much to talk about around that. But until we begin to move away from buying into a society that, you know, that steps on the human face or leaves our images, you know, women's bodies, men's faces on the magazine stands, and where the voice of women, the place of women, the protection of women, the protection of little children, that those things are really serious values to our society, even as, you know, bingo chips are moving across screens in foreign currency exchanges and all of those kind of head games that are being played. Until there's that real change of heart that moves into that political will, it'll be individual people, and there are many in this community who are reaching out to these people and you know, volunteering at the Warming Center or coming up with creative ideas. We talk about heroes, and obviously, you know, Dennis Chippa comes to mind, but there are many heroes who are unsung. Please forgive that answer. It's just
well, it makes me want to hear your definition of a man. What is a definition of a man to live up to?
Now, do you mean the mailman, as in not the person who, you know, sends our bills to us, but or are you thinking of a person in the old traditional name of man? Not to sort of, you know, butt end you with that, you know, sexist kind of.
No, a very, very sexist, genderized question. A man's role in life in a community.
Well, I think there are as many roles as there are men. So, you know, you and I grew up with a very, very heterosexual kind of take on all of that. And certainly that has a significant place in society, particularly in terms of fatherhood and all of those kinds of roles and so on. But you know, I'm drawn from a play I used to teach called Man for All Seasons, and Robert Bolt, who wasn't a Christian, picks a Roman Catholic saint during the time of Henry VIII and presents his hero as a man for all seasons. And so what is it that makes him a man for all seasons? Well, I think it's ultimately that sense of authenticity and integrity. And I think that has to be grounded in some kind of compassion and imagination, obviously some kind of a work ethic so that you kind of are able to, if you can, live by the sweat of your own brow, and that you have the courage to kind of pursue your own dreams, to borrow from Henry David Thoreau's conclusion to Walden, to follow your own star, and yet at the same time to take risks, whether it's the risks of love, the risks of political belief, spiritual directions. And then out of that, obviously, has to come some kind of sense of self-sacrifice and some sense of willingness to serve and willingness to challenge, particularly to speak truth to power, which, you know, obviously is at the heart of the healthiest civilizations.
I like that answer.
Thank you.
How long were you a teacher, Dennis?
Dave, I can't remember.
And I don't think you've stopped, really, because I'm learning lots today.
So my friend Ian McCullough once put it, we were talking about all this, and I have to confess that I saw writing as this and teaching as that, and then obviously the common bridge of literature where, you know, significant amount of my teaching was teaching English, but then I taught some senior religion. I taught phys ed a lot in different places and many other subjects. 7 years ago, I was asked to teach social studies in northwestern Quebec Algonquin community. So I guess it's been 40 years or so.
Wow.
Maybe a little more than 40 years. began in BC and then came to Southern Ontario where I grew up, taught there for 2 years, moved up to Northern Quebec for a few years, came back down. And at that point, I was looking to live in North Bay. My wife and I fell in love with North Bay. We used to have good times passing through North Bay. We thought this would be a good place to raise kids and good balance of life between the beauty of the outdoors, the wilderness, and yet sense of culture and coffee shops and pubs and so on. And then back up north and then back up south and then finally here. And so most of the teaching has been high school with maybe 18, 20 years of stuff at Nipissing, some FACED stuff and creative writing in particular. Mm-hmm. So
long enough to have a couple good stories.
It's all one. It's all one, you know.
Oh, okay.
So that sense of the hardening of the categories began to break down for me maybe 20 years ago, where I began to see that myself being a writer, a poet, that I can bring that into a classroom, and then out of my sense of humanity and my care for young people and my treasuring of life, the gift of life, and on their behalf as well as on mine, that gave me new energies, new forms of approach for literature. So I feel very blessed to have had that journey. When I first started off back in the 1800s, I thought I'd be a full-time writer, and I just sort of decided, well, I'll do a bit of teaching to support myself, but write. And then I end up falling in love with teaching, and then having to kind of balance the teaching with the writing. And it's meant for a lot of late nights or all-nighters sometimes before going in to teach, but somehow I've been given the health and the strength and the energy and the support from my family and my creator to kind of keep on keeping on, you know. But teaching's a blast. I mean, I guess if anybody was really honest, one of the things they're most afraid of, I mean, apart from losing one's mind, is losing one's sense of life, one's joy, one's inner youth. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, poetry is about singing and praising. And when you have the opportunity through the lens of these young lenses to encourage creative thinking and critical thinking at the same time, which we know our world lacks a little of. I mean, consider that, during one sort of political period in Ontario, the leaders decided that the last thing they want is for students to learn about media. So they scrapped all the media programs in Ontario high schools. And that was before social media. And so you don't need to be a rocket scientist to see what kind of fallout that occurs when just one little signing of a paper over one aspect of an education system can cause a society, a culture, a community to implode. So it's been a tremendous gift. I have found so many of my students, in fact, all of them in different ways, Dave, profoundly inspiring. Whether it's their courage just getting up in the morning, maybe leaving a home that was full of turmoil, to a young artist taking the risk to move towards art, or somebody really trying to understand something really profound, even beyond their years. And then, of course, I've been blessed with, I have been also blessed by learning from some people indirectly, as, when in the world of adulthood, you can learn things indirectly from people. And there's always, one or two people, particularly if you're working in education, that you can learn indirectly from those people. But the majority of people that I've worked with, in fact, just about 99%, have been so inspiring. And if people realize just what teachers give, not just when they go into the classroom and in giving them of themselves, as my brother Sean would say, but also in the service and contribution to the development of those students by organizing field trips, coaching teams, running clubs, challenging ill-informed educational leaders. All of that stuff is part of the journey towards trying to build, what Christians might call the kingdom of God. I don't mean the big K kingdom, jumping on the table, I am saved, but a deeper sense of a love and an understanding and a courage and a cooperation weaving,
That sacred ground of community.
Very much so. And then that's why to talk about art and sports becomes so crucial, because that's where we can find room for our common stories and our common cares, and then at the same time celebrate and make sense of our gift of life.
I think that's a good note to end on. Denis, I've enjoyed our talk.
As always, Dave.
I know you have a duty to go to, or else I would have kept you here longer. And but I want to talk to you again sometime, because as you were reading and as we were talking, and your eloquence and ability to quote the masters, and in a way where I could understand why you're quoting them, is I find invigorating.
Oh, thank you.
I want to attend the next Conspiracy of Three while you're reading on November 12th. And then on the 16th, you said you're going to have your first real launch of your books?
Yes, finally, yeah.
Right, and that's going to be at the library?
Yeah.
Right.
The 12th is the upstairs in the mezzanine. That's where we're having most of our readings.
Yep.
And our other guest, our featured writer, is Bruce Meyer from Barrie, and he's an amazing poet and story writer, and very excited about reading with him. We both started off at U of T writing at the same time. We were publishing in the same journals, and Bruce went on to write, I think, about 60 books, and I'm on my fourth. But he's a remarkable writer, and so even if you don't want to come and listen to me tell bad jokes, you really should make the effort to come and hear Bruce Meyer. This is his third time reading in North Bay, but he's gone through some health challenges. I'm driving down to get him in Barrie and bringing him back, and the next day after he stays over in North Bay. And so this is a rare opportunity to hear one of our most powerful voices in Canada. Well,
I'm looking forward to it. Usually those are on the Tuesday night, eh?
Tuesday night, 7.
Yeah.
And Saturday is in the auditorium.
Okay.
My beloved and my children are kind of organizing it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not very good at these things. And so I'm really hoping there'll be more than 5 or 6 people there, or I will get royal hell.
I think what time is that one?
That's at 2 in the afternoon, Dave.
I think I might be going to that one. The Tuesday nights I've been spending on NDA Sports. It depends if the new league starts.
It's been
the new season.
It's so interesting, all the sports. And it's great post-COVID to see all that coming together.
Yeah, no, I see it every time I go out, and to see the athletes and the coaches, and they're right into it. And I know what that does for people. So I'm very happy to see.
No, it's a very worthy vocation that you and Mr. McLean are up to. And I did a bit this summer, because this is the first summer since COVID that I didn't play ball, or second summer actually. So I really missed it, and I started, as I was telling you, just popping in and watching the odd ball game or a bit of soccer, that kind of thing. And watching a sport well played by any age group, any level, is just one of the real pleasures of life. And I think, think of something like the women's soccer in the Olympics, or the men's basketball. It's the stories behind it that bring in the humanity and really wake us up to what life can be. It's not just about the score, winning and losing. We know Mr. Trump's a master at all that kind of stuff. But it's the stories that cause, say, the goaltender Anderson to bring his team all the way, deep into the playoffs while his wife is really, really ill with cancer. It's those kinds of things that give people that kind of strength and that kind of wonder to live to the fullest, to use your own phrase.
Excellent.
So don't miss your sports, but I'll send you a postcard.
There you go. Well, thanks for joining us for another Back in the Bay magazine podcast. You'll see some of this written up in the winter edition. It'll be coming out before Christmas, hopefully. Thank you for your support. Please like, share, and comment. That helps the algorithm. And if you can, sign up for the northbayecho.ca the newsletter, which tries to bring together all the different news and stories and the podcasts that's going on in the community, your own little TV guide. Anyways, have a good day. Thank you, Dennis.
I'll send you one or two poems you can put on, and then if you put my email, then people can contact me.
I will.
If they want to.
For sure.
Thanks. It's fun.
Did you think it was going to be like this?
I was hoping it would be.
Yeah.
I mean, knowing you, I thought it would be, but I guess I never know what the hell's going to come out of my mouth, Dave. Particularly when you saw me in one or two things where I'm about to leave and Mary